now is Professor Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science at Busan National University in South Korea. It's very good to have you with us. Diplomacy, sanctions, downright criticism and very strong words from some nations. None of this has stopped North Korea carrying out another missile launch. What do you think has prompted it to fire this latest missile over Japan?
Sure. Thank you for having me. A couple of things. One, I think North Korea is probably more confident than in the past that these kinds of provocations, this is a pretty big one, won't be punished because North Korea is now a nuclear missile power. The governments around the world, the relevant governments, particularly South Korea, Japan, and the United States, will not say that. Nobody wants to actually sort of formally put that in print. But, North Korea is here now with a nuclear missile, and there's really not a whole lot we can do about it. And I think that probably gives them a certain amount of confidence they can get away with more stuff. Also, the North Koreans like to provoke during the American-South Korean drills and exercises. There's a big one going on right now. It's called Ulchi Freedom Guardian, and this is all about interoperability and scenarios for conflict with North Korea. The North Koreans claim that these are rehearsals for invasion. They're not, but the North Koreans like to sort of respond in some way, and missile tests have sort of been one of their favorites. So this is something we kind of expect. Not this particular thing shooting over the islands, but something is pretty typical.
So do you think that sanctions just aren't working?
No, actually, I don't. And I think the sanctions sort of get an unfair rap on this. I think the proper counterfactual for sanctions is not, well, they shouldn't have a nuclear program at all because the sanctions work well. It's rather, how much worse would the nuclear program be if we didn't have sanctions? That is to say, you hear people kick around that they might have 50 or 60 warheads now. Well, maybe they'd have 200 if we didn't have the sanctions. So I would argue that the sanctions stay in place. We need to start going after North Korean money, particularly North Korean money in Chinese banks. I think that's sort of the big goal out there. But no, we shouldn't let up, and we should keep going back to the UN Security Council. I mean, there's really no good kinetic options, right? Talking to North Korea is probably not going to work. We should try that too. I don't really see much choice but to continue to do what we're doing, which is the UN and missile defense.
OK, so let's explore that a little bit more. What do you think the response is going to be from South Korea, from Japan, which beyond the rhetoric has traditionally, kept a relatively low profile on this matter? What do you think the response is going to be this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's really sort of on Japan now to sort of find some kind of way to respond to this, right? As your correspondents previously pointed out, North Korea's only done this twice before. This time it really was sort of obviously a ballistic missile. The previous ones were too. But this really is about terrorizing Japanese civilians, and it's hard to be a serious government without some kind of response. If I had to guess in Japan, this will really improve the position of hawks in Japan who want missile defense. Japan does not have, for example, a THAAD battery, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense battery, which now exists in South Korea to protect against these kinds of strikes. I would imagine there'll be pressure in Japan to get that too. In general, I think this is sort of the strategic race in Asia you'll see in the next decade or so with North Korea. As the North Koreans build more missiles, there's going to be an increasing amount of pressure for missile defense, and so you'll get a kind of arms race around that.
And in terms of resuming any sort of talks over North Korea's nuclear weapons program, what of that route? Does that stand any chance of any success?
Yeah, probably not. The North Koreans have put a huge amount of money into getting a nuclear weapon. North Korea's GDP is only about $35 to $40 billion, considering, depending what statistic you take, right? That's really not a lot of money for a program this complicated. I've heard numbers thrown around as high as 8% of GDP has gone into this program. So they're not going to give it up without some massive concession. And it's just not one the United States is going to give. The United States is not going to unilaterally pull out of South Korea or something like that. Right. So the talks probably won't really go very far. We should keep trying. Maybe we can get some small concessions. We may make small changes. But, we've been talking to the North Koreans about their nuclear program since the early 1990s. And it's always been sort of 2 steps forward, then 1 to the right and 3 back and the rest of it. And it's kind of never really gone anywhere. We should keep trying, but we should be very skeptical that there's some big, some grand agreement at the end of this.
OK, Professor Kelly, thank you very much for your time today. Professor Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science at Busan National University in South Korea.